Hello, I'm Sifu Steve Jackowicz here at Classical Martial Arts of Long Island, and today we're going to be able to speak with a guest that we have, one of my teachers, Grand Master Yuanming Zhang from Sichuan, China. So he's been able to come in and work with us. So here at Classical Martial Arts, we teach a variety of martial arts, both Chinese and Japanese styles of martial arts. We have a full curriculum in both, with a variety of offerings in both different types of martial arts. So today we're talking in terms of our Chinese martial arts tradition, and specifically Grandmaster Yuanming, who's here with us, is going to be speaking about internal Kung Fu. Now, he has quite an impressive background. He was born into a martial arts family. He's trained since the time he was a boy. He's a disciple of multiple different traditions of martial arts, both from the Qingcheng Mountain lineage traditions, from the Wudang traditions, both covering different aspects of Taoist martial arts, as well as he's a 31st generation inheritor of the Shaolin temple and the Shaolin tradition of martial arts, specifically of the Yuan-Chan lineage of Shaolin. So he's going to be speaking to us today. He's also an advisor to the United Nations Council on Qigong, which is therapeutic breathing practices. And he's also trained and steeped in traditional Chinese medicine. So Master Zhang is quite an well-learned, well-versed martial arts practitioner, as well as in his early years a competitor. He has spanned the globe, taught in many different countries, and he's here with us in New York, able to speak with us today here and explain at first the aspects of what is internal Kung Fu and what's external Kung Fu. So hopefully it's going to be a very exciting discussion this afternoon. 张师傅。
好，你好。中国功夫从历史上来讲，上一个世纪20-30年代和现代教育结合，就产生了南京中央国术馆，就是国家层面的一个学府，叫南京中央国术馆。在这个国术馆里就分两个系、两个部门，内家功夫、外家功夫。外家功夫就以少林派为代表，内家功夫就以武当派为代表。差别就是外面筋骨皮看起来肌肉发达，很有力量啊。内家功夫呢，就是太极形意八卦，讲内面精气神，一口气，就这个差别，内家外家。
So when we discuss the difference between what we call internal and external martial arts, we have to start with where those terms, both where they came from, how they became popular, how they became a standard set of terms in the martial arts. So the terminology itself, although having some ancient roots, really comes back to when the martial arts were being modernized in the early 1900s. And part of the Nanjing Sport Culture Institute, their attempts to preserve traditional culture and bring it forth, what they did is they made these large taxonomic divisions. The biggest division was made between what was called external Kung Fu and internal Kung Fu. The external Kung Fu took what was represented by the Shaolin tradition as its kind of prime representative methodology. And the internal Kung Fu was listed as having the Wudang tradition as its prime methodology. The external Kung Fu was described as being marked by specific methods to use your arms, your legs, your muscles, to really be looked at from the perspective of how you moved physically and how you positioned your body. Meanwhile, the internal martial arts were described by the movement of qi, energy, and what the Chinese call Jing, Qi, and Shen. Jing meaning essence, Qi meaning energy or metabolic force, and Shen meaning spirit. Well, you may know as the internal arts things such as Tai Chi Chuan, that very slow-moving practice people do, Xing Yi Chuan, form intention boxing, and Ba Gua Zhang, the 8 trigram palm. All of those systems said to be focused on what goes on inside you, the inner workings of the body, and slowly, over time, finding them in external expression. And that's why those methods were called internal martial arts.
好，所谓内家拳、外家拳，内家功夫、外家功夫是相对而言，外家功夫以练肌肉、练力量为主要特点，那么内家功夫呢，就是练精气神、练锐气、练智慧，为主要的差别。
Further, once this distinction was established, further research or further kind of codification of the martial arts said that external martial arts really focused on the use of your muscles and your bones and training methods that made those stronger and made physical technique more emphasized, stronger, more central to the way you practiced. And that the aspects of training the body were effectively the main focus of external martial arts, or at least that's how it was described. Now, internal martial arts was described as being focused on those inner components of being, the Jing, the Qi, the Shen, essence, energy, and spirit. And cultivating that, the byproduct of which would also be health and strength, but more importantly, would also be wisdom. And that cultivation preceding many of the things that would bring them out as physical arts in the world, first focusing on the inner qualities that would make the physical qualities better used.
外家功夫就像大家看到的很多 movie star 就是动作很漂亮速度比较快，这一类呢就适合小朋友、小孩子因为看起来比较漂亮，速度比较快，所以比较适合年轻人、小孩子锻炼。那么internal功夫呢，主要是年龄大一点的人，那么更喜欢健康长寿。可是呢，就我的经验，internal功夫对小孩子尤其好，好在哪里？开发他们的智慧。智慧读书可以读到很好的学校去，所以internal功夫对从小培养一个人的人格、开发特异功能、健康长寿是很大的特点。
So as we look at and discuss what are the differences, what are the different points, the different ways that we can look at the external and internal martial arts. One way is to understand the external martial arts being focused on visible movements, often are used by movie stars, used in films. They have dramatic kicks and punches and jumps, all the things that people look at and say, oh, this is fantastic. This is martial arts. And especially children would look at it because the speed of movement is very fast. The action is very intense. The changes and turns and the angles are very various. And as such, it's very captivating. So children often look at that. And that's one of the reasons why external kung fu and external methods are so popular in the martial arts, because they capture our attention early on. And they have that performance dynamic that when viewed emits and embodies qualities we want, like strength and timing, precision and speed. Well, in the internal martial arts, it's a little different because internal martial arts are focused more on inner qualities, qualities within yourself, on health and longevity, and focused on aspects that don't overstrain you, don't push you too hard, that maybe don't move as fast when you train, maybe move in a more rhythmic component, seeking aspects of balance and timing, aspects of strength, but strength from holding in positions, from moving slowly through positions. So the components within those internal martial arts are appreciated more by people a little bit older. Maybe they can't move as fast. Maybe they could, but they're more interested in promoting health and fighting a different battle, a battle day to day of what they do and how they stay healthy, how they live longer, and how they cultivate an understanding of the relationship of force to the body over time. So that emphasis means that in general, they're not as exciting to watch, but they're maybe very beneficial to do.
好，外家功夫呢，速度快，跳跃的动作多，所以年龄大的人就不太适合了。internal功夫呢，像我现在这样打坐， 就非常适合小朋友啊。一方面要健康，要动作快的可以练习；另一方面，同时静坐可以培养他的人格的健全、智慧的提升，学习就比普通的人要好。
So again, external martial arts being fast and moving can be engaging, especially when you're younger and when you want to move and jump and you want to be very active. While internal martial arts focuses more on those inner qualities, and as such, in addition to things that are a little slow moving, may have more meditation, may have more standing or sitting. And as Master Zhang sat there and took the top robe to the side, you could see he's sitting in a full lotus. Now he's well over 60 and he can still sit in full lotus. But the cultivation of internal martial arts is for health. And in that regard, if you're a kid, you want to run around, understanding why, learning to stand, learning to sit, and being able to do those things for a long time that's a hard nut to crack. It's a hard thing to come to understand. While the older person would understand the benefit of what seems like simple motion is very important, because over time, many simple motions are things that our bodies can't do anymore. So that emphasis is very different between external and internal.
所以总的说来，就是看老师怎么教，因人施教呢，让小朋友练外家功夫、练内家功夫，就可以全面的成长，人格的培养很好。那么年龄大的人呢，就不适合动作快蹦跳容易受伤。所以引头的功夫适合各种年龄的人，外家功夫呢就适合年轻一点的人，这就是总的差别。
And so another aspect of this differentiation is that the teachers who teach external and internal Kung Fu often present it to students differently. Presenting the external martial arts as something that you have to do quickly, fast, repeatedly. You have to jump, you have to kick, you have to do these very strong and intense actions. And that encourages the younger player, the younger adherent to get strong and to play out their fantasies and play out their desires to move like the movie stars. And maybe kick and hit, and even if they get bumped, they don't get so hurt because they're young. Both, they heal faster, and even though they think they're really tough, they're young, they don't hit as hard as they could as an adult. Now, when we get to internal Kung Fu, well, you get a little older, you get a little smarter, you get a little stronger, you get a little heavier. So if you train the same way as the way the kids do, maybe you hurt yourself from jumping, from landing, from fighting so intensely, from training like that, because your body's heavier, your body's bigger. So you become more appreciative of preserving it. So you're okay with training in ways that don't challenge you the same way that a child would be challenged. You move differently. And by doing so, come to an appreciation of that. So that's another dynamic. And that's why many of the internal martial arts teachers have various methods based on adapting to the physical state of the person that may have to adapt how they move, what they do, how they approach it, but at the same time, getting them where they need to go.
再从拳术的种类来说呢，现代在中国以及受中国老师传播的影响呢，主要又分为两大类，一类叫武术，发音名字叫武术呢，这就是中华人民共和国1949年建立的这个政权，创立的是体育项目套路就是做体育运动比赛的拳种，所以它的名称就叫武术。这一类之外，就还有中华民族传统流传下来的主要的大流派，大家熟悉的就是少林派、武当派还有青城派、峨眉派这些传统的流派。
Additionally, the external martial arts have, in many ways, moved into a competitive format. Now, this is around the world, but specifically speaking of China, after the Cultural Revolution, right, that went 1966 to 76, subsequent to the Communist Revolution in 1949, there was a push to understand or to look at martial arts as being a type of physical education, a physical exercise, to put it under the same rubric that other sports are, and a very physical dynamic, and using athletic theory to understand it. And in that sense, developing competitions that look at the external martial arts as being competitive in terms of routines, in terms of height of the movements, in terms of how dynamic the jumps and the kicks and the flips are, and to really put it into methodologies that are somewhat gymnastic, and having competitions that people can participate or watch. And in that regard, the tradition was not held up as being the most important over the athleticism. And so the external martial arts has embraced a very athletic-driven concept. So therefore, it's something that they think of, oh, that's part of the gym sciences, part of the exercise sciences. Oh, it's one of the things that we do, and it's a type of exercise. Well, it's different than the internal martial arts. For an internal martial arts, there are the ideas of traditional lineages. Not to say that that does not exist in external martial arts, but the lineage approach and lineage methods and the variety of approaches of how these are passed down is very emphasized, is highly emphasized in the internal martial arts world, where which lineage, which approach one comes from is important not just from a historical standpoint, but because the techniques within the lineage fit together most effectively. And therefore, one would have a hard time borrowing a technique from one lineage and transporting it to another. Unlike in the external martial arts, where one given movement could be taken, could be applied or utilized in a different routine within another tradition's forms. So that's another definite, decisive aspect of how the external and internal martial arts are different.
好，就我本人来说呢，上个世纪80年代，那我是通过考试，中国国家武术运动比赛的裁判，但更多的呢，我是传统的少林禅武艺31代传承大宗师专家，武当全真龙门派17代大师专家，但是更为特色的是我家族祖先的传承，从耶路安普尔轩辕皇帝登基传到今年2025年是4723年了，这个就是昆仑仙宗黄帝隐仙派。
So speaking more personally about himself, Master Zhang has several different aspects of the martial arts. One aspect is his Shaolin tradition. And the Shaolin tradition, back in the 90s when they were trying to preserve many things from Shaolin, the Shaolin tradition that Master Zhang is part of was once again identified and brought forth because there was a certain period in time where the martial arts had fallen a little bit into on the wayside a bit and had to be revitalized. And as part of that, the Shaolin tradition was trying to find all these different lineage approaches that had been spread and kind of scattered over the long history of China, long history of Shaolin, and regroup them. And so his approach, the approach that he had inherited, the Yuan Chan, primordial Chan approach, was once again brought back in the folds under the auspices of the Shaolin Temple. But that's one approach. And that approach is recognized, the Shaolin methodology is recognized by the government, recognized in that format, under the Shaolin umbrella, Shaolin rubric of approaches. Well, additionally, Master Zhang has Taoist methods that are part of the Longmen Pai, Dragon Gate methodologies that relate to both the Qingcheng mountain traditions and the Wudang mountain traditions. And those traditions are Taoist traditions, and those Taoist traditions have many Liu Pai, many types of lineages and sublineages, things that broke off and moved as the traditions spread throughout China, which is a country larger than Europe and had much development over time. So there's multiple different variations in the lineages. Well, he's an inheritor of those approaches too. But additionally, he has the family methods. Now, when we say family methods, in the West, we think of nuclear families, small families of mom and dad and a couple of kids. We're talking about families in the Chinese tradition. We're talking about clans of many, many people living in villages who had the same last name because they lived in the same village, but were in an extended family format related to each other. And in that, Master Zhang has a family tradition that holds that methodology called the Yingshenpai, which means the shadow immortal tradition, or the tradition of the immortals, meaning the immortal teachings or the teachings that last, of the dynamic of improving yourself, that is shadow, meaning it's not something that's taught to separate yourself from society, but rather you have a regular job, but you cultivate or build up yourself to be a better person, to be a healthier person, and to help society. So in that sense called shadow immortal. In other words, your quest for immortality and spiritual benefit is the shadow behind what you do in your public face. Now those methods in his lineage tradition, they claim, they understand that it goes back to the legendary emperor, the Yellow Emperor, Shenren Huangdi. Right? And so that's 4,780 some odd years ago that you see the Yellow Emperor being considered to be a historical figure. So that tradition is said, it understands in its own teachings that it goes back that far. Well, that really bespeaks that it has ancient roots and modern application.
当代现在在全世界用少林流派名字、用武当流派名字的这个老师学校比较多，但是真正的是正统的传承的比较少。尤其是我讲的，我的家族从轩辕皇帝传到现在的昆仑仙宗黄帝隐仙派呢，那么就只有我这个家族，我开始把它公开。
So in the modern day, around the world, people utilize the name Shaolin. It's well known. Whether the martial tradition has a very clear relationship to Shaolin Temple or not, that name is well known, and that connection is often brought forth by martial arts schools and traditions. The same thing with Wudang. Wudang has become very famous as a Taoist training center, and there are many lineage traditions that trace themselves back to Wudang, whether it's easy to prove or not. Okay. However, the Qingcheng Mountain methods, the methods that from where Master Zhang originally comes from, those methods are not as well known. And those methods pass down, these shadow immortal traditions, or the traditions that are known as the Kunlun Mountain spiritual immortal traditions. These traditions have not yet been made famous. They don't have the same notoriety as the other methods, though they are as ancient, they are as strong, they do have multiple lineage approaches within them, but they're not as well known out in the West or outside of China.
所以现代在中国，无论是少林寺、武当山、青城山、峨眉山，大部分的学校老师，他们用的是传统的名字，真正的教的技术、教的方法是他们现代人自己想象创编的，大部分不是传统传承，传统传承的很少。那今天呢，我重点是讲昆仑仙宗黄帝隐仙派的特点。第一个特点就是讲激发特异功能，开天眼。我们普通人眼睛闭上，什么都看不见。通过黄帝隐仙派的特别的训练呢，天眼打开，闭上眼睛还能看到气，看到自己的灵魂。七彩神光就像彩虹，七彩神光在个人的生命就是灵魂，在宇宙就是叫元神。在学术上是把人体看成小宇宙，人体以外的自然就是大宇宙，讲天人合一，讲天意时空和个人人生的使命、人生的梦想相通相应，平衡，人生美好，身心健康，健康长寿。
So, in the modern day, though we do have much conversation about lineage, about these traditions and how they're ancient, many of the techniques that are practiced in modern martial arts schools and modern schools have been adapted very strongly. And although maybe in name they are linked to the lineage, in practice, perhaps they're not. Perhaps they've changed in terms of the modern competitive dynamic or modern dynamic. So it is an unfortunate thing to say, but many times the lineage teachers or people who present themselves as lineage teachers don't necessarily always espouse the same principles that would have been taught in that lineage in the ancient period. Well, that being the case, there are still many people who preserve these old methods. So talking about these old methods, Master Zhang can speak specifically on his lineage, not on all lineages, of course, but on his lineage. And he says, well, within this method that his family lineage says traces back to the time of the mythical Yellow Emperor, 4,700 some odd years ago. What's the goal of it? What's the purpose? And in many ways, the purpose is the cultivation of life force, the cultivation of your health and your longevity, the cultivation of that which keeps you alive, and understanding the preservation of that force. And that is the aspect of preserving it. It's the truest self-defense, for it's focused on defending that force inside you that keeps you alive, working on getting healthier, living longer, being happier, being more at peace with yourself. And that is part of the idea of what's known as the Kunlun Mountain spiritual immortal tradition, with this like a peak upon a mountain to find within yourself the highest spiritual good, the highest goods. And that is a big difference in emphasis between internal and external martial arts.
就现代人而言，如果仅仅是为了强身健体、做体育的运动，那么很多的现代武术的学校去学习就是锻炼身体嘛，作为体育运动健康，这个呢，就很多地方都可以达到这个目的。如果我们是想以传统的文化来开发我们的潜在的功能，探索时间、空间、宇宙的奥妙，让我们活得非常有意义很有使命，那就建议大家来体验昆仑仙宗黄帝隐仙派给你带来的幸福无穷。
So if the way you look at martial arts is exercise, if that's the way you look at it, there's lots of types of exercise. You can lift weights, you can do yoga, you can do a lot of different things. You can move your arms and legs and get healthy, and that's great. That's very, very good for you, promotes health. And if that's what excites you, then perhaps the external martial arts is a great place to be. If, however, you're focused more on some cultural or cultured approach that looks at the wisdom of the past and says, how do I preserve that? Maybe people before might have not had as much technology, but maybe have had ways that they made themselves better. And in that sense, you'd want to know or want to look at things that are passed down, methods passed down to promote health, to promote the health of the organs, the health of the meridians, the health of the body, things that are used to calm and steady the mind, to balance the emotions, to come to some state where you, the small universe, you, the individual, can find your place in the large universe, in the world around you. And by doing so, come to a level of peace and satisfaction that could keep you not only healthy, but also happy. And if that's what you're after, then the traditions of the internal martial arts, like Master Zhang's tradition, that has such a long history, maybe that's what's best for you, because maybe it would help you fight that ultimate enemy, the one within you, that keeps you from getting where you want to go.
各位朋友，如果 我们有缘可以和大哥史蒂夫我们一起通过开天眼、元神感应，能够闭上眼睛看到自己的灵魂的神光。通过这个灵魂的神光呢，在睡觉的时候，可以在梦中灵魂超越肉体，穿越时间和空间，去感受宇宙中无穷的奥妙无穷的幸福，让自己灵性提升活出自己使命、性命、幸福。
So, for those who cultivate internal martial arts, as Master Zhang said, people like himself, people like me, people who follow this tradition, and the friends we have out there who follow that, of all the different lineages that seek this, in many ways are seeking to experience part of the wonder of the world, wonder of the universe, and to become connected with it, to come to a internal type of correspondent reflection, that you reflect the very forces and nature of the universe around you. And in so doing, you solve a fundamental issue, the issue of your place in existence. And doing that has transformations to your organs, to your emotions, and to your state of mind. That is a core idea that we see repeated in the internal arts, trying to come to that state of fulfillment, of where your heart is full of joy and balanced, and then your choices can be most efficient, and your actions can be most wise. And that's, in many ways, the goal of this kind of training.
各位朋友，无论你是什么原因，对内家功夫、外家功夫、现代武术还是传统的武学之道有兴趣的话呢，请你到我们纽约 Long Island 古道之馆 Dr. Steve 创办的古道之馆，都能够得到很好的结果。
I said, so whatever approach you want to go after, if you want to go after the external martial arts and kick and punch and move in that way, that's wonderful. If you want to explore the internal martial arts and this internal quest for the quest of meaning and such, that's also wonderful. And he says, to all my friends out there who are listening for all this, he said, if you like the modern approach and the competitive approach, that's terrific. If you like the traditional approach and you want to connect to history, that's terrific too. He goes, and interestingly, here with, as he calls me, Dr. Steve, because I am a doctor, and then also martial arts teacher. He says, then here, what Dr. Steve has set up at Classical Martial Arts of Long Island is a place where you can find all those different approaches, find them under one roof, come and explore them, and make connection to traditional teachers like Master Zhang and people we bring in to be able to represent those things. So he's hoping you, on your path, can find some way to move forward in your health and your happiness and your longevity.
所以大家看，古道之馆这么多世界性的奖杯这就是大哥史蒂夫是全世界一流的老师，所以有兴趣的朋友，你来感受会获得最好的收效。
And it says, and you see on the school symbol over there, he goes, there might be a couple of trophies sitting around there too. He said, so maybe the school over here does pretty well, both on the competitive side and on the cultivation side. And he says, in his opinion, he's being very nice in this. He says, Dr. Steve over here, his student, he goes, is one of the best teachers that you could find around the world to help you on your path. So he's being very kind to me on that one. Okay. So thank you, Master Zhang, for talking to us today, right? And thank you for listening. Hopefully you found it very exciting and interesting, right? We went on. Again, if you have an interest in this, contact us, come on down. And Master Zhang comes to us twice a year. He passes through on his travels around the world and meets us here in Long Island at Classical Martial Arts of Long Island. So have a great day. Thank you so much.